Welcome to the Filmological Society, brought to you by Redacted Media and 6.5 Media. In today's episode, we count down the 100 greatest comedies according to the BBC. And now, here are your hosts, Kris Schulz and Chad Halvorsen.
All right, welcome back to another podisode of the Filmological Society, the countdown show where we are counting down the top 100 movies of all time in the comedy genre, according to the BBC, the foremost experts in comedy. So, I am one of your hosts. I am Kris Schulz. With me, as always, is Chad Halvorsen. How are you doing today, Chad?
I'm doing great, Kris. It looks like you brought a friend with you.
I did. We both have a friend here today. We have Daniel Budnick, accomplished author, movie buff, TV buff, all-around great guy. How you doing today, Dan?
I'm doing all right, Kris. Chad, it's lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet you.
And Kris, it's nice to talk to you again. It's been a few years.
It has been. I know, Dan, we did a podcast for another entity, I guess you could say, called Podcast Mania, where we would review horror movies. This is a very different genre podcast, so a little less scary at times, sometimes a little more scary, but that's okay. That's okay. So today we are all the way up to 37, Chad. Can you believe that?
That's how old I am.
I know. Well, this is our second Preston Sturges film.
Yes.
Because we did the Palm Beach Story.
Yep.
Yep, that was one of our earlier films. I had to look back at that.
Where was it at? That's got to be like top.
The Palm Beach Story was, it wasn't one of the early, it was like in the 70s, 75.
Wow. Kris, how long have we been doing this now?
I think 3 years, 4 years, something like that.
And look at how much we've grown.
I know.
You're big boys.
I know. We are.
I'm so proud.
So this is a movie, Sullivan's Travels. Again, Preston Sturges wrote and directed it, starring Joel McCrea. And this is the first film, I have to say, that I've seen with the very lovely Veronica Lake.
Mm-hmm.
Veronica Lake, who, by the way, was like 6 months pregnant in this film.
Yes. You could sort of semi-spot it sometimes, like when she has a bathrobe on and when she's sitting with her legs crossed at the pool. And there's kind of, it's like, is there a little bulge there? And then the moments when you see her kind of like when they leap off the train and you know it's a stunt person.
Yeah.
But when they're flipping around, you're like, no, stop.
Yeah, apparently she hid it. And the only person that knew it was the costume designer.
Huh.
Oh, yeah, Edith Head, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. She's the only one who knew in the early days anyway, because she didn't want to lose the job. But Veronica Lake, I think more known as like a noir actress, that femme fatale type.
She definitely looks like it, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's got the peekaboo hair where it goes over the one eye, and yeah, she's gorgeous. I've only seen her in a few things. One of those being a movie that we might talk about briefly that she's probably wasn't too proud of, called Flesh Feast, from the end of her life.
Oh yeah,
that's an odd one.
Yeah, well, I mean, she was that was in 1970s. So
yes,
she was 68 or so.
Yeah, she plays crazy scientists who uses maggots to rebuild human bodies.
Nice.
And she's she's still got some sexiness there, but it's
It's a different.
It's yes, very different.
Is she the archetype, the catalyst for Jessica Rabbit?
Oh, I don't know. She definitely could be.
It sort of looks like Jessica Rabbit, but I don't know. Tangent.
Yeah, she definitely has. Yeah, she definitely has that look. She was in a lot of noir films.
Like also that sarcasm and
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I would not be surprised. So let me start. Chad, had you seen this film before?
I have not until
nor have I.
8 hours ago.
And then Dan, had you seen this film before?
You know what? I saw it back in school over 20 years ago. I had a period of about a month where I watched a half a dozen Preston Sturges films in close proximity, and this was one of them. But I haven't it's been something I've been meaning to watch again, but I keep not watching it until I watch it a few hours ago. So
Okay. Yeah, this would be, because of the list, the second Preston Sturges film that I've seen. I was able to, I acquired the film from my local library, so I was able to get the Criterion collection.
Oh, nice.
So that had a very nice little documentary added to it about Preston Sturges. So we can take some time to talk about him in a little bit. But what were your thoughts? What were your initial thoughts before we get into the plot and all that? You know, Dan, it's been a while. What did you think of this film? Is it what you remember? Did you like it more now or less now than when you saw it before?
I think I seem to remember liking it about the same, because my thought about my remembrance of it was that I really loved the way it started. And I really love the first few opening scenes with Veronica Lake, just with the two of them talking. They're lovely. And I remembered very strongly the montage where they're with all the homeless people, and they're watching the preacher yelling at them. You can't hear it. It's all music playing. And I remember the scene in the church at the end with the chain gang watching the cartoon. But I remember also thinking as I watched it that I thought it was a slightly strange comedy, because it's pretty darn funny for like the first half. And then as it kind of goes along, like the last 20 minutes, apart from a joke or two, it's deadly serious and dark. So it's weird too, because when it takes that turn and goes dark, I think I seem to remember when it goes kind of dark and it goes to the chain gang. I remember seeing it so many years ago and thinking, oh yeah, I really love when it does this. But this time I didn't like it as much. I kind of wish that he had been able to make it more. No, I'm not Preston Sturges, and he can do whatever the hell he wants to do.
Right.
But I almost wish he had been able to, because it's such a shift. I mean, from the goofy slapstick scene with the caravan and whoa, everyone's being crazy, and then the last 20 minutes are just so kind of dark, and it just the shift in the third act was a bit too much for me. And I get what he was doing when he kept having him wind up in L.A. again. Just back in Hollywood. And just the feeling that in the end that it's like a gravity and you're pulled back to where you should be, which I thought was wonderful. But I also kind of wished that, I mean, it's Sullivan's Travels. You think Gulliver's Travels. I kind of wish there had been more travel.
There wasn't much.
Yeah, there isn't. It keeps getting cut short.
Yeah. Chad, what about you? What were your thoughts on this film? Initial thoughts?
I also had issues with the way the narrative kind of flowed. It almost seemed like all the acts needed to be shifted earlier, because the first act feels like it should have been a prologue, and then the third act should be like the second into the third act. Like that whole chain gang thing came way too late for me. And it just felt off. I agree with Dan. Like, I feel like it was really moving comedic wise. I loved how he made the joke about like, oh, we could just keep making Keystone movies, which I'm assuming refer to the Keystone Cops.
Yeah.
And then they had a Keystone Cops type action sequence with the kid in the dune buggy and everybody else following them in the giant van. So like, it was very smart, but yeah, the tonal shift in the third act, it would have been less harsh if that darkness would have crescendoed with the narrative, because it feels like it just slams right in your face. And it
does. It's like,
it's real quick. The way it resolves itself too, almost like immediately in the last 5 minutes, felt super cheap too.
Yeah, it goes just too quick.
Yeah,
too quick.
Well, and just but like the girl, because Veronica Lake doesn't have a name in this film. She's just the girl. Like it's another montage scene with like a slide whistle to indicate, oh look, he's in the paper. We can get him free.
Yeah.
Like after like this beating that he does took in prison.
I mean, it's very much like I'm a fugitive in a chain gang kind of thing, early 30s kind of prison movies. But then all of a sudden, and she's in its big dress, knocking over Indians on the lot and everything.
Right. It's once again, it's a slapstick comedy suddenly.
Are there no legal repercussions for lying about saying that you killed a person when you really didn't? Like, that's a federal crime, right? Like,
and did they just he hit the guy in the head with the rock? They found out he was a film director. He was like, "Oh, we're sorry, sir.
yeah.
And we'll have the guy you beat apologize to you.
You're very rich.
Yes,
Sorry.
It's yeah.
You know, some things in movies are just timeless and never change.
Yeah, right.
And you know, I think if you're rich, you can get away with anything.
Yeah,
even attempted murder. So.
And that's the way he does say something like, "I'm a film director. This kind of thing doesn't happen to famous film directors." Like, well, I guess most of the time it doesn't, huh? Yeah.
So in this film, just to give like a brief plot synopsis, and Chad and Dan, you can jump in, but I'll start. So you have a director played by Joel McCrea, who's known. He was in the Palm Beach Story. He was one of the leads there as well, and he's known for more of his Western films than he is for his comedy films. But he can hold his own with it. He can handle the dialogue. This is a very dialogue heavy comedy. But he's a big time successful director who makes a lot of comedy films, but he feels that, you know what, I want to make something more serious, more grounded. There's a lot of bad things going on in the world, and people need to know about this. I need to do this. And his producers remind him, you know nothing of that world. You've always been rich. You've always been in boarding school. You know nothing of the world. So he's like, well, you know what? I'm going to learn it. I'm going to dress like a hobo and put a nickel or a dime in my pocket, and I'm just going to see what happens.
Yeah, he's so bad off as a hobo, he doesn't even have the stick with his bindle. He just like has the little bindle. He doesn't have the stick over his shoulder walking along. That's how
like lower class hobo.
Yes, he's third class hobo.
Stick. Can't even afford the stick. So he sets off to the rails, and he first ends up in a bed and breakfast.
Yes, yeah, that was a straight. That was an interesting scene. Sort of like two crazy like sisters. I thought it was going to become Arsenic and Old Lace or something there for a second. Yeah, the one sister wants to seduce him, and all he wants to do is run away. It's a funny scene, but also kind of like it's one of those scenes you forget, or I forgot at the end of the movie. And then when I was scanning my notes, I have those two crazy sisters. I was like, oh yeah, that scene.
What stood out for the most in that scene is the gag with the dead husband. That keeps you, and that bit's not new, but like the way that portrait looked, and it kept getting more and more judgmental, was perfect.
Yes,
it was well done. So then he keeps ending up. Gets on a truck.
Yeah, because he falls into the bucket and he's soaking wet.
Soaking wet. So he hitchhikes, gets picked up by a semi truck, gets to go in the back, and ends up back in Hollywood.
Yep.
And so what does he go to the diner then and meets up the girl. Veronica Lake's character, who is she's a wannabe actress who hasn't gotten her big break, and she's ready to leave Hollywood. Go back home, wherever that is, because you don't hear her. She always says different things. Kansas is Chicago. It's here. It's there. And Chad, what happens after that?
So he obviously is hungry, and I mean he's looking the part. So she does an act of kindness and buys some eggs and bacon. They start talking, and eventually he's still trying to stay in character because he wants people to think that he's keeps saying tramp, and I want to get back to that on what that means. But you know, he's dressed like a homeless person. She buys him the breakfast, and he's like, well, you know, I can help you out here and here, because he's still rich and he still has things. So he's like, well, why don't we go borrow my friend's car, and we'll go where you need to go. And they ended up getting arrested because he didn't leave a note saying he was going to take his own car. So his butler and his driver just assumed somebody stole it.
Right. Which one would?
Yeah. And then eventually the girl joins up with John. It's like, you know, I want to go on this adventure with you. We'll do this together. And they set off. The bit with the butler and the driver trying to get the information on where the tramps would get on.
Funny,
Yeah.
That was a good bit. I mean, they're not. Well, they had so it's two different instances they go out. The first time they go out, she gets really hungry. Like, I don't know, within like 12 hours of them being, homeless, she's hungry. And then finally they get to the point where they realize that the caravan that had been following them was in the same area because they were in Las Vegas, because previously said they were going to meet up with this caravan in Las Vegas. So they just go back to being pampered again, and they kind of like recharge their batteries, almost like one of those weekend warriors, or like people that climb Mount Everest but still hire Sherpas and shit to do all the like heavy lifting and stuff, and like take all the glory, but then still go home at night and have TiVo and shit. Why did I say TiVo? Nobody uses TiVo. God. Chad, you done it again.
I will say the couple of times when they return, it's almost like if you're watching like a vampire movie or something, and at nighttime everything's scary and creepy, but then the moment the sun comes up, everyone has time to regroup and figure out what's going on. But of course, in most vampire movies, suddenly it's nighttime again. But that's sort of the way this is. They're on the road, they're learning a bit. Then all of a sudden they're back in the comfy beds, getting showers and baths, and Veronica Lake's taking a shower, and everyone's happy. But then they're back out on the road again.
And that's the whole thing. He's making a movie. Like, that's the whole subtext of this thing. Like that, he's researching for this movie. So it's not like he's a social scientist going out there and researching like, how can we fix this? Like, he's just trying to learn what it is or what he thinks it is so it can give him content.
And what I found was funny is the movie he wanted to make was
Oh Brother,
Where Art Thou?
Super confused me. But yeah.
I imagine the Coen brothers watched this film, and
I think so.
I would assume that's where they got this from, right? Because it's not a real book.
No, I don't believe so. Yeah.
So anyways, John finally, John and the girl, they go through this montage of seeing things, people living in squalor. I think at one point they have bugs in their clothes.
Yeah, like bed bugs or something.
Yeah, and then finally they
fleas.
Yeah, they get to a point where they're eat out of a garbage can, and they're like, "Nope, we're gonna go back. I think we've learned all we need to learn. I draw the line at eating out of a garbage can." So then John, and again, because he's making a film, as a promo for this film, he's going to hand out $5 bills to everybody, that helped him, that he said. But
at the hobo shelter.
On Skid Row there, or wherever it is,
Which felt weird. It's definitely a stunt and a gimmick. But he goes out, he starts handing out money. Somebody figures out what he's doing, jumps him, takes all his money, ends up getting hit by a train in the most dumb way possible because he couldn't decide to go right or left from the train. Do I go to that? Nope. I gotta go this way. Wait. No.
For about 2 seconds it works because he's at a point where 3 tracks stretch out around him. I don't know what you call the train, but suddenly there are 3 tracks instead of 1. So, but then the thought is, why not just run? Why run to the edge of one track and then run to the other? Just run. The train ain't following you.
It felt very much like that scene in Austin Powers where the slow steamroller is heading towards the guy. He's screaming, and it's 200 yards away, but he doesn't move. He just screams.
Yeah.
Felt a little bit like that.
It's not the best scene.
All right. Well, then I'm going to hand it off to Dan then, because we're at the third act now.
Oh, I'll take the third act. Okay. And what happens here is he's taken John's shoes, and he's got all of John's money, and they learn a little later. Well, the chauffeur goes to the morgue because John's missing, and he finds this unidentifiable body that was found with all this money, and there's a shoe where he hid his ID I think his butler hit his ID there at the beginning of the movie. So suddenly everywhere, John L. Sullivan is dead. And it's funny, John L. Sullivan, whenever I think John L. Sullivan, I think of the boxer, who John L. Sullivan and I looked him up. He was the last heavyweight no gloves boxer and the first heavyweight with gloves boxer in like the 1910 or something like that. I'm not sure why he gave him the same, they don't have the same middle name, but they're both John L. Sullivan. But so everyone's like mourning his death, and then John wakes up somewhere or other on the train, and unfortunately he has one of the rules is sort of you don't jump on the train within the train yard, because then the bulls, sort of the train police, get you. And unfortunately, he's unconscious. He wakes up, gets out of the train, gets in a tussle with the bull, and ends up hitting the bull several times in the head with a rock. And unfortunately, John has lost his memory, and everything's very hazy, and he's sent to 6 years on basically a chain gang. And and after a time, he's like, I'm John L. Sullivan. And everyone's like, yeah, you're a nut. And like the chief is always hitting him and beating him. And there's a very nice sort of weedy trusty guy. And they have a scene where they go to a church, like sort of like a Baptist church. And they're going to show cartoons. And it's basically the congregation lets in this group of criminals, with their chain gang ankles and everything, and they sit there and they watch a Walt Disney cartoon, a cartoon with Pluto getting all kinds of shenanigans. That crazy dog, and it's just everyone is laughing and everyone is having a great time. And John, who believed that no one wanted to laugh anymore, and that the world was too awful to laugh at, suddenly just sees all these people just having a great time, and he starts to laugh too. And then the very end, should I say the very ending?
Yeah.
Is it? Oh, okay.
It's old enough.
Yes.
We share spoilers all the time.
Yes. So basically the very ending, and when I say the very ending, this is like literally like the church sequence begins like 10 minutes from the end. So there's a lot packed into the last 10 minutes. It's basically, he's like, I got to get out of here. What can I do? And the trustee says, well, maybe you can get your picture in the paper. Well, who gets their picture in their paper? Famous people. And he said, yeah, when they thought I died, they did that for me. And the trustee rails off some other things and says, how about murderers? So then John begins to rush towards the guy in charge, says, I killed John L. Sullivan. So immediately there are pictures all across the country of the man who killed director John L. Sullivan. And of course, the slide whistle, Veronica Lake's girl sees it, and yeah, he's alive. And they bring him back, and everyone's, yeah, you guys, thanks so much. And it looks like he's going to marry the girl. We still haven't named her. And there is one plot line involving his wife, who's now married someone else because she thought he was dead, and he wants a divorce from her. So this is great because she's now committed bigamy. And it ends with him saying, I'm not going to make, O brother, where art thou? I'm going to make comedies because as rough as everything gets, people still need to laugh. And that's how the movie ends.
Yep. And then, the more you know goes across the screen at the end. It was really touching.
I love how
I didn't know that's where it came from.
This movie is so old that a person couldn't get a divorce unless the other person,
Yeah.
Come on.
Well, I think there were some financial issues. Like he was going to lose. I thought he said something like
he would lose
a
money.
lot of money.
Yeah.
And the way that it was kind of, because it was his accountant.
Yeah, the businessman. Yeah, the
business manager that was advising him to do things is the one that his ex-wife married.
Yes.
So he was set up to lose like everything to her if he filed for divorce.
I will say, it's a trope and blah, blah, blah. But, the girl kind of like, she doesn't like fall in love with John right away, but is interested in him. But you obviously know where it's going to go. The fact that he had restraint, like, even though he knew he was in a bad marriage and like he didn't like it, but there was nothing he could do about it. Like, I don't know. I thought that was kind of cool because 9 times out of 10, I mean, I know I would have been like, yeah, F that lady.
Yeah, I'm not married. No way. Yeah, and there's the scene where they're in like the pig car, and they wake up in the morning and they're kind of like spooning, and he kind of like when he wakes up and realizes it, he kind of rolls away from her.
Yeah.
And but yeah, it's really nicely done. She's great in it, and he's great in it too. I actually, when she's on, I think she's quite wonderful. So
Yeah.
both of them are really great. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the basic film. Why don't we take a quick break for our sponsors, and when we come back, let's dive deep into some Preston Sturges, because I think this is the last film.
Hi, I'm Ryan.
And I'm Mike.
And we are brothers-in-law. We both love beer and are amateur home brewers.
Wait, so does that make us brothers-in-law?
I believe so.
Every episode, we will talk about aspects of beer and home brewing.
But nothing super technical because we're learning this too.
So join us as we sit down together and dive into something beer-related.
Whether it's a little field research, tasting a certain beer style, or beers from a specific brewery.
Talk about our experiences brewing beer at home, including our own solo brews, as well as themed competitions we'll set up along the way.
We will also talk about some of our favorite aspects of brewing, like hops, extra ingredients, building our brew cave, and more. And of course, our own misadventures that have happened along the way.
So, if you like beer, are home brewing already,
or if you have an interest in home brewing and don't know where to start,
join us on Brothers-in-Law Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
And make sure to follow us on Twitter @BrothersInLaw and check out our website, brothersinlaw.com.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Jake, have you ever been looking for a definitive Nintendo ranking and can't seem to find it because it's just everybody's own opinion?
Honestly, all the time, Sam.
Well, I'm looking for someone to give us the answers.
Wait, you mean like a podcast made by two young, handsome men where they create a definitive top 5 list of all things Nintendo?
Should we just do it ourselves?
Yeah, that sounds fantastic.
Let's give it a shot. I'm Sam.
And I'm Jake.
And at Top 5 Nintendo, I'm going to give you my top 5 list.
And I'm going to give you my top 5 list.
And then we're going to duke it out and see what the real top 5 is.
All right. Well, thank you. That was some great sponsors right there.
I
am very interested in that.
I am going to buy whatever we were just telling you to buy.
Yep. Or listen, whatever it is, I'm gonna do it. That's how I'm good. Yeah. So one item or one area. There's a lot of little, I guess, plot lines, or there's a lot of plot lines in this film, which is shocking, because I think, you know, the main stereotype, I guess, for older films is that they're more simplistic, but there are a lot of plot lines, and they all get resolved basically in this film. But there's one scene that we really neglected, and that's the opening scene. Dan, do you want to describe that?
Yeah, well, the movie begins with him and two of the studio heads viewing a scene with two guys fighting on top of a train. Which is a lot of fun. There's some fun stunts in it, and two guys fall in the water at the end, and it says the end. And he's trying to, and John is trying to convince these two guys that he wants to do Brother, Where Art Thou? And they leave the screening room and go into one of the executives' office, and it's basically this really fast-paced screwball comedy type scene with him trying to convince them that he wants to do this, and them saying, like we said earlier, you've never had anything bad happen to your life. You don't going back and forth and back and forth. And the great thing about the scene is that, one, it's very funny. And two, it's very well written. And three, I believe, don't quote me on this, but the entire scene, which is maybe 4 or 5 minutes, is basically one take.
Yeah,
It was.
Which was okay, good. I thought so. I thought I might have. It was about 2 minutes in when I thought, is this all one take? And it's just one take. And he's got the camera in one spot, and he moves it slightly when he needs to, goes in a little bit, comes back. The three of them are here. The three of them are there. One of them is up here. One of them is back there. And even after Joe McCrea leaves, there's still like another 30 or 40 seconds with the two guys behind the desk. And it's like, when you start the scene, you don't know anything about them. 5 minutes and one take later, you know everything you need to know, and the story's going. And I thought that was so well done. And so, because then with the next scene, you're off and running already. It's so quick.
So with that scene, and I was going to bring this up. So the cinematographer challenged Preston Sturges because it was supposed to be basically that was supposed to be shot in 2 days. And the studio want their shot, they want their coverage shot, they want their wide, they want their mediums, they want their tights, they want back and forth and all that, so they have to cover all that. So it was supposed to be 2 days. The cinematographer said, I think we can do this in one take. I dare you, Preston Sturges, to do this in one take. And Preston Sturges wasn't one to turn down dares. So what was supposed to be a 2-day take, they were done after 3 takes.
Nice.
After three tries by 11 a.m. Which that got the studio excited.
That's cool.
So
I mean, I don't know what the specific timing was back, and it depends on what camera they were using back then. But reels can last from anywhere from a couple minutes, like 2 minutes to 5 minutes. So that's probably why they're talking so fast, and they probably rehearsed it a lot. But yeah, that's basically that's one reel's worth of acting.
Which I mean that's expensive. I mean, that film was much more expensive than the digital is now, where it's just like, we'll do it again. Just keep it running. Yeah. Like in an Adam Sandler film, just hit record and just walk away.
There's a
roll on everything.
Yep, roll on everything. We'll get something.
I'm so glad the cinematographer did that, because it took a scene that I thought with a lot of cuts and such, I thought it might have slowed it down. It just makes it just moves so nicely, and it has an energy to it that carries the film along for quite some time.
The cherry on the top for that scene for me is their whole conversation is they're berating this director. Like, what do you know about hard work and, blah, blah, blah. So he leaves like, well, I'm going to go be a hobo. And then the other one was like, well, you did get a loan from your family. And the other guy's like, well, you didn't entirely do this by yourself. Making the point, like, nobody ever comes rags to riches. There's always somebody there that helps you.
Yeah.
So that whole beginning, Dan, you're right. Like, it was just a really good way to tee off the whole movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, so the cinematographer for the film was John Seitz. Yeah, but I think what is interesting is that Preston Sturges wasn't somebody who grew up in the Hollywood system. And there was a little bit of a Hollywood system. This is still 1940s, so the industry is still relatively new. It's still finding itself. This is before MPAA ratings. This is I'm not even sure if the Hays Code was in place at this point, but yeah, Preston Sturges. So he was a someone who grew up in a very he like half of his life, half of his childhood year was in France, and half of it was in the United States. Because his mom was kind of a bohemian type person who she was an actor and performer who had to go to Europe to do it in French because that's where you did it. And then in the other half of the year, like, lived in the United States, and the third husband she had was very wealthy, and not Preston's dad, but someone he looked to as a dad. So that's the life that he grew up with. And he did not, and this is great in the documentary, he really didn't know what he wanted to do. He kind of was figuring it out, and then someone said, hey, you could write. So he wrote, and he started writing screenplays, and then he was offered, he said, hey, for $10, just pay me $10, I'll write this film, but then I also direct it, and that was his first film, The Great McGinty.
Yeah.
Have you seen that film, Dan?
That was one I saw like 20 or so years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, I all the ones I saw, I remember enjoying some more than others, but I didn't see one that I walked away from thinking like, oh, what a pile that was. I enjoyed all of them to some extent. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Like, that was like he had like a 5-film highlight. Like this film, The Great McGinty, Lady Eve, Palm Beach Story, Hail the Conquering Hero,
Creek, yeah.
The Witch. There's a witch one. But yeah, then after that, his career kind of tumbles.
Yeah, he does the at the end he does the film with Harold Lloyd at the end of the 40s, which actually is a pretty good film. I like it. I mean, it's not as good as Harold Lloyd films at Harold Lloyd's best, but it's it's a fun film. It's fun to see those two because they're very. I mean, Harold Lloyd obviously was very at the height. He was very visual, very slapstick, and Preston Sturges. To be honest, in this movie, some of the slapstick is fun, but some of it is is a little forced looking. To me, it doesn't have the flow that like the joy of the slapstick at its best in the 20s and early 30s was there's more of a flow to it. Now I know sometimes that's because they it went a little faster, but still like when they're getting on board the train and he's like pushing Veronica Lake up and then he's coming up, it felt less funny and more like, oh gosh, are they going to get on that train? I'm a little worried that they're going to fall off that train. And I started to worry if they were going to hurt themselves rather than laughing. But I think with his eye for like composition, the way he uses the crowds and with his ear for dialogue, I don't think slapstick is something he really has to worry about too much. Let others take care of that.
Yeah, I would agree. I think his strongest the strongest skill he had was writing the dialogue, and I think when he was being pushed to do more and got out of that, then he wasn't as comfortable. Because I think his films, his first 5 films were successful because he was learning what he was doing with the filming, right? Yeah. Like he was trying to figure it out, and it worked. And everyone's listening to him because after his first success, like, oh, he's this big time guy. Like, we have to listen to him.
Yeah, and a writer-director like that in comedy, you really didn't get that. I mean, you got Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, of course, but apart like this kind of verbal,
I think
more verbal.
Yeah, I think how he was described like being more the one of the first true Hollywood auteurs. Mm-hmm. We're kind of controlling everything, and you instead of using techniques to you have a story and you use techniques to film it, is using techniques to tell the story. And that's what he did. Like he said, this is how I want to see it. Let's do it. And figured out. He had a whole crew, like a whole entourage that was in all of his films, like 20 different actors.
Some
crazy.
fun. William Demarest, who was, of course, I grew up knowing as Uncle Charlie from My Three Sons, and the one guy. There's, I think the actor's name was Byron Folger, who's kind of a nerdy looking guy. He's the guy who gives him the money, who gives John all the money when he's sitting up in the bed, and he was in a ton of stuff too. So you see all these great faces where you're like, oh, those guys. Yeah. What
do you think about now that, Chad, this is our second Preston Sturges film? I know the Palm Beach Story was a while ago, but it was another one that was very dialogue heavy, and it was telling the story. There was, because even in this film, like any of like the big action, the hitting the train yard worker,
the bolt,
all that, it was all off screen. Mm-hmm. Like everything was off screen, all the violence, everything. So, Chad, what were your thoughts about how Preston Sturges kind of handled this film?
I mean, as far as there's kind of like 2 questions there, so I'll try to answer both of them. But as far as the like heavy on the dialogue, when I first started getting into film, and I'm not comparing this person to Preston Sturges,
I know who you're gonna say,
but Kevin Smith, like.
Oh, sure.
I was heavy into Kevin Smith. Like when I first started getting into film, it was like him. It was basically everybody that worked for Miramax, right? And all of them were very articulate and poignant and had something to say, at least to me at the time. So I see a lot of that, where that came from with directors and writers like Preston Sturges. And as far as, what was the second question?
Like, how did you feel? Like, so
about the visual.
Yeah, so you're an editor, you're a producer, like those are your main roles. So looking at what you know about Preston Sturges now, what are your thoughts on him as a director?
I mean, I think it's a smart move. Like, you don't, especially in 41, you don't have to see all the violence and the macabre. And, he's a good enough filmmaker to let the viewer make the connection and not treat them like an idiot. And I mean, it's the sign of the times too. It was 1941, where when this was made, we weren't in World War II. When this came out, we were. So we were already seeing the worst things ever. Like, we weren't in the war, but we were still getting films from, our allies, and there was no reason to see any of that.
Yeah. Yep.
Especially in a movie where the main character is trying to I got to figure out why the world sucks so much. Why show it? We know the world sucks. And then the end is all about, we need to laugh. We can't take that away. So in a movie and a comedy like this, I thought it was done great.
What did you both think of the opening dedication on this film?
I forgot about that. Yeah.
Yes.
So opening the film is there's this book that opens, and there's this big dedication there to the memory of those who made us laugh, the motley mountebanks of the clowns, the buffoons, in all times and nations, whose efforts have lightened our burden a little. This picture is affectionately dedicated.
Yeah. I mean, I don't ever want to be buried in a cemetery, but I would love to have some version of that quote. I don't know. Maybe I get shot out of a cannon after I die. So if you guys could get some jets that skywrite that,
shoot you down.
Well, that too.
I was going to say shoot you up and you'd explode across a huge space.
But it's such a good, especially again for reasons I just previously said. We were going through a lot as a country during that time, and we still weren't out of the Depression fully yet. We needed something, and to dedicate a film to the people that knew the formula for escapism, I thought was sweet.
Yeah. I think to me, the golden age of comedy, American comedy, to me is sort of the mid, 1915 or so to the mid to late 30s. So as much as I love Preston Sturges, to me he's slightly outside of that. He's still wonderful, but it's just to me from when Chaplin began doing his mutuals in 1915 to 1918, which were 12 two-reelers, which are just they're just, there's some that are just silly, there's some that are a little more complex, there are some that have a lot of pathos to them, and from that point until say the mid to late 30s, your Night at the Opera, Day at the Races, Way Out West, The Bank Dick, Never Give a Sucker an Even Break, that kind of thing, which it's funny because this film came out the year that W.C. Fields, I think, did his last film, and the Marx Brothers did their last regular film. And in between that point where Laurel and Hardy finished at Hell Roach, and they were wonderful, and they suddenly were going to go to the studios and became, part of my language, shit. And so there's this, because the 6 movies they did for the studios, the Bullfighters and Nothing But Trouble and The Big Noise, aren't good. But prior to that, they're my favorites. In the late 20s, early 30s, in the 30s, they are my favorite comedy team. But I think once everyone finally got the hang of the way this sound thing worked, and began to be able to tell stories well with sound, which took a few years, comedy shifts away from the visual, which was beautiful at its absolute best, was absolutely beautiful, and it becomes more about gag writers telling jokes. Look at Abbott and Costello in the 40s. I'm a big Abbott and Costello fan, but they were always at the mercy of their scripts. If they had a bad script, how many stories you read where Costello would read a script and just throw it on the table and say, this is garbage. And they were always at the mercy of their scripts. With Preston Sturges, you got great scripts, so there's nothing to be at the mercy of. But as the 40s go along, you see that more and more, where comedy, it's more about the writers and their ability do good gags, and you realize that for everyone who's great, there are a bunch that aren't. I mean, it's like sitcoms or anything, you know, like the 60s or 70s. For every sitcom that's great, you get one where you sit there going, how do these people make a living doing this? and so to me, it's like Preston Sturges is right on that spot where his batch of films are beautiful, but then there's a stretch of American comedy for like about 15 years or so where it kind of, there isn't much that I really love from the mid-ish 40s to like until you get into the 60s. There are films I enjoy, but not like I did in the 20s and 30s.
Yeah, I think you get the Hays Code, and you get all those other things that come into play. It's right around the same time. You know, and even like this film. This film was not exported during World War II.
I was going to say, the domestic on it wasn't great either.
Any guess? Well, this was a hit. This is considered a hit for Preston Sturges. So the script was purchased for like $6,000 at the time. But any guesses why this film, the New York Censorship Board, formally disapproved this film being exported?
Is it because it had black actors in it?
No.
Is it because they called one actor the colored chef? Is what they're credited as? No? Okay.
The colored chef.
It was because it's World War II, and the government didn't want the chain gang scene to be used as anti-American propaganda.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Damn commies.
Huh. Wow. Okay. Yeah. I don't think I would have even thought of that.
Wow.
I was trying to think of something maybe with like Veronica Lake, maybe. Well, there's a scene where the caravan is going along and the woman's in the front seat and she's like up in the air and her legs are flailing around. You can see her. Her bloomers.
Yeah, that's okay.
I'm scandalized. I'm here in 2022 and I'm scandalized by how much leg she's showing. And then Veronica Lake in the robe, and I thought, is that too much leg?
Well, again, they did well hiding because she was. This film took about 2 months to get done, and she was 6 months pregnant when it started. So she was 8 months pregnant by the end of it. Yeah. So like you can't hide that at that point. Like
I guess that's why they have her that huge hoop skirt thing.
Right at the end.
In the final scene.
She is like bowling people over then. So and it's funny, Chad, you mentioned with like the colored chef and the NAACP actually sent Preston Sturges. He wrote a very nice letter congratulating Preston Sturges for writing black people in such a dignified and decent manner.
Yeah, they weren't. When I saw him on screen on first, I'm like, oh God, this is a film from the 40s. What's going to happen?
Yeah, I had that too. I shivered a bit. I thought, should I leave the room? Do I want to see it?
But it was fun. The chef has a really good scene. So the car chase scene, they're being chased by this bus, and this bus is, completely Hollywood. And the fact that it holds a lot of people.
Everything.
It's got a kitchen, a dining area. It's very posh. And when they're chasing after John and this kid, like at one point the chef gets shot through the top of the bus. He gets, like a pie in the face moment. The water squirts out of the thing. Like it's very, is that vaudevillian?
I would say probably,
very vaudevillian.
Very, very vaudevillian.
Well, that actor was part of his crew though too. Like a lot of the people in that bus were part of the Preston Sturges crew. So he ended up being in basically all the other Preston Sturges big films.
Okay.
But I think it was really in the church scene where it's a black church and the black minister just says like, hey, we have to remember that these always think of the people that that have it worse than you do. Mm-hmm. And the majority of the prisoners that are walked in on the chain gang are all white. Mm-hmm. And I think that was 1941 to say something like that is pretty
Ballsy.
pretty brave. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and the preacher is just he's very good in that scene, and even I love the moment at the beginning where you see him kind of like at the end of his sermon, and then he steps forward and he kind of waves to someone to bring the screen down, and he's kind of doing Steve's getting a little excited because like the screen is waving around a bit. And there's kind of feels like a little ad-libbing around it, and everyone's laughing, and it's really nicely. It feels very organic. It feels very real.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and then when they bring the guys in and they all sit down, and the movie begins, there's the moment the lights go out, it's one big community enjoying a laugh in like I said earlier, like in these dark times. Now, granted, one or two of them might be laughing out of just pure hysteria, because a few of the close-ups of some of the prisoners, they look like they've been on the chain gang out in the sun so long, just to have a moment to laugh in the dark, they look like they're going a bit screwball. But apart from that, it's a beautiful scene.
Now I finally get full circle the joke in Ferris Bueller's Day Off with Cameron, when he's sick in bed. And he says, when Cameron was in Egypt's land, let my Cameron go. I always loved that scene, but never knew the
song.
That it was the
reference. Yeah. So now I learned something new today.
I will have to say, though, I think that scene in particular, when the lights are down and all that, like, cameras and lighting and all that were created and refined with white people in mind, because it's very hard.
Yeah.
Like it's like it's gotten better, but it's still not the same level. Because any of the black people that are laughing at the film, like they're just lost in it, but with the white people, they're lit a little bit differently, so you can see them. And especially, obviously the star of the film is going to be lit well, so that you can see what he's saying and how he's reacting.
Well,
so
it's one thing to have, black actors in your film. Would have been a completely different thing if he had black and white, integrated crews. You know what I mean? Like,
right. And I don't know that.
Well, I can tell you, it was a no. Like, the whole reason why we just started figuring out how to light for black people is we're starting to let more sorry, I shouldn't say let. They are getting more opportunities to make films, that are in their voice and, for the people and stuff. But like, it's the same with technology with like freaking, you ever go wash your hands with those automatic sinks? A lot of times people with darker skin don't set those sensors off because all that technology was made by white people. So I'm not surprised that all the people that were black were underlit and underexposed because they didn't know what they were doing.
Yeah.
Pigment's fickle on screen.
Is.
It's really hard to light for black. So, sorry, rant over.
It's just different. All right. Dan, any final thoughts on this film?
I actually want to. May I recommend another film with hobos?
Yes, of course. We're all about the hobos here.
Which, in some respect, is sort of like this, but in other respect, isn't like it at all. It's from the late '60s, from 1968, I think. It's made by a guy named Titus Moody, who was an actor in a lot of like Coleman Francis films and James Bryan films and things like that in the 60s and 70s. And he made two sort of documentaries. One was called Outlaw Motorcycles, which is only a half an hour about him joining a motorcycle gang in LA. And the other was called The Last of the American Hobos. And in it, the basic premise is he's in LA every year in Britt, Iowa. I think it's Britt, Iowa. They have a hobo convention, and all the hobos go to Britt for like a weekend. And it's basically he packs his little bindle sack and just takes the clothes on his back and a couple dollars, and he rides the rails from LA to the convention. and the movie is a series of him meeting up with various hobos on the way, and sort of, I say semi-documentary because there are a few bits where like they do recreations of scenes where hobos tell their story, and he kind of dramatizes it using the hobos, and some of them might not be real hobos, but some of them definitely are. And it's sort of this wonderful movie where it's a rather odd movie, but it's just, he just travels and he meets all the hobos, and you learn about like the hobo language and like the hobo signs that they put on like telephone poles and things. And they read the Hobo News, which was the hobo newspaper that used to go out, and you see them cooking, and like little hobo encampments by rivers, and like a one-legged guy who lives in a cave, and all sorts of great, and crowning the king of the hobos at the end of the movie. And it's a really fascinating film, and it's of course being made almost 30 years later. It's a completely different. Like at the end of this one, he talks about like sending young people to Vietnam and then becoming hippies and stuff. So it's a complete generational shift. But if you love your hobos, this will give you an extra serving.
The film that came to mind with this for me was Mel Brooks's Life Stinks.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Where have you seen that one, Chad?
No, I have not.
That one, it's not one of his best films, I will say, but it's the same sort of thing as a successful businessman who basically makes a bet that I can live off with nothing, and his business partner or whatever cheats him out of everything, so then he's got to reclaim everything.
It's got its charms, but it's not one of his best.
No.
Yeah,
I was thinking more. This was, I think, number 52 on our list. But My Man Godfrey, I feel like, was a better film than this.
I thought so too.
Yeah,
I thought so. I would agree.
Yeah, I would say so too. Yeah.
Like
I like this film. I think it's better than some of the. I mean, it definitely, I see its spot on this list, but yeah, I think My Man Godfrey was better.
I wouldn't have it this low. Definitely like higher than 75 for me. One more thing, I looked up what tramps came from. It's a Civil War era term. It means tramping about.
Oh,
so another, and I mean, we don't call people hobos anymore. We're trying not to call them homeless anymore.
I don't think people ride the rails so much anymore.
Yeah, that's something. It's fascinating to watch. Like I said in that movie, it's fascinating to watch the way they get on the trains and they travel on there. Like people meet up. Last time I saw you, you were going west. Now you're going back east. It's nice to see you for a few hours and get to talk to you for a little bit before we go our separate ways again, kind of thing. And it's I couldn't do it. I get motion sickness. No, I'm kidding. I couldn't do it. But it's fascinating. And like the point of that movie is they're at that point where the hobos are dying off. Like that sort of. And they're settling in cities and stuff and not traveling.
I would like to give an honorable mention to Hobo with the Shotgun, but that movie sucked. I was totally disappointed.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's our episode for today. Dan, thank you so much for joining us for this film.
Oh yeah, it was fun.
Hey, why don't you tell everyone some of your books and some of the other things that you're doing?
Oh sure. I have 4 books out. Most recent one just came out a few months ago at the end of 2021. It's called From Beverly Hills to Hooterville, Exploring TV's Henningverse 1962 to 1971. It is 666 reviews of every episode of the Beverly Hillbillies, Petticoat Junction, and Green Acres, which also have hobos in some of their episodes.
So did Gilligan's Island.
True, yeah, exactly. Hobos, hippies, beatniks, they got them all. And the book is written in broadcast order. So you get a Beverly Hillbillies episode, a Petticoat Junction review, a Green Acres review, and you get all 3 of those shows were in like what we would call a shared universe. They all took place in the same universe, and the shows crossed over with one another, and the characters knew one another. So it's kind of fun to read and see the universe develop and the characters develop. And Green Acres is one of my favorite TV shows of all time, and I'm so happy I got to write about it. And then my other books are 80s action movies on the cheap. which is low-budget action movies from the 80s from all around the world. Bleeding Skull, a 1980s trash horror odyssey, which I co-wrote with Joseph A. Ziemba of AGFA and Alamo Drafthouse. And we reviewed about 300 at the time, they were very obscure horror films, but thanks to like Vinegar Syndrome and Arrow and Severin and all of them, a lot of them aren't as obscure as they were. And then I have a kid's book named Arthur, Bertrand, and Constance, which is Kindle only, and which is about a little girl who parents are about to get a divorce, and she's moved to a new town, and she doesn't have any friends. And sort of at her loneliest moment one night, her bedsheet and pillowcase come to life, and they go on adventures.
Nice.
And I also do several podcasts. I do Made for TV Mayhem Show, which is made for TV movies with my good friend, podcast pal, the author Amanda Reyes, author of Are You in the House Alone? TV Movie Compendium.
Trying to get her on this show too. Amanda's great. And the other host is Nathan Johnson, who's one of the hosts of the Hysteria Continues, which is, I think, the best slasher movie podcast out there. And then I do a podcast called Eventually Super Train, which is short-lived TV shows. And at the moment we go one episode at a time. And we cover 3 shows in each. That didn't make sense. I should have gone the other way around with that sentence. Each episode has 3 segments. Each segment covers a short-lived TV show, 1 episode at a time. So the episode that's going up shortly is 122. And myself and my friend Mitchell are covering the last episode of a spy show called Search from the early 70s. Myself and my friend Tim are covering the Trevi Collection episode of Kolchak. And myself and my friend Kris are discussing the the gun on Ice Planet Zero, Part 2 from Battlestar Galactica. And then I also do a Happy Days podcast, which season 6 is about to begin. That's called Rockin' All Week with You. And I do several minute-by-minute podcasts where you go through movies a minute at a time. And I'm doing 3 of them right now. The first one is called 70s Friends of Frankenstein, and I'm covering Blackenstein and Frankenstein 80. The second one is Spooky Nights Spent in a Ghost House, which is the Wonderful Spookies and Umberto Lenzi's Ghost House. And the last one is Howling 2 and 7-2, which is covering Howling 2, Your Sister is a Werewolf, and Howling New Moon Rising. And I'm at the 35th episode of each of those. Those go slowly, but they build as they go. And I've done about 4 or 5 of those. I've covered Pieces and A Night to Dismember and Blood Lake and Night of Horror. And those are a lot of fun. Those are just fun. Just sit down for an hour and record, and it's just fun. I'm just grateful you had time for us.
Yeah, Dan.
Of course.
Way to flex on us.
We just have this one thing.
When you asked if I would talk about Sullivan's Travels, I just kept thinking I've been meaning to pick up that Blu-ray for ages, so this is the perfect excuse.
Well, good. Well, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
And then, just to let everyone know, the next episode for Chad and myself will be from 1988. A Fish Called Wanda.
Can't wait.
The first Monty Python-esque film on this list for us.
And I'm a huge Monty Python fan. I've only seen bits and pieces of this movie on TV.
Ooh.
So, and I know there's some nudity, and I'm ready. I'm ready.
I saw it for the first time in like 15 years about 3 months ago, and it still holds up. It's a beautiful farce. It just builds and builds. It gets crazier and crazier.
I love Jamie Lee Curtis. Like she's
great.
I just reviewed the new season of Reno 911, and she's in an episode.
Oh yeah,
it's freaking amazing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Well, I'm excited to see. It's been a while since I've seen this as well. So, any final thoughts from you, Chad?
No. I mean, since Dan flexed so hard, I'm on the One of Us podcast group.
You're making me look bad.
Crap, I'm sorry. I don't do anything. I don't want anything.
Well, Chad, it's okay. You know why?
Because Lord loves a working man.
Working man. Don't trust Whitey. See a doctor and get rid of it. Thank you, everybody.
Later.
Bye-bye.
Thank you again for listening to the Film Illogical Society. If you'd like to listen to similar podcasts, please check out 65 Media on Stitcher, iTunes, and Facebook, or check out Redacted Media on Facebook or YouTube.